Montana Territory, May 1883. The train wheels screamed against the tracks as it lumbered into the sleepy town of Red Rock, a plume of steam erupting like a startled dragon. Archer Rowan, a man carved from the very landscape he inhabited, stood patiently by the platform, his weathered boots planted firmly, thumbs tucked into the worn leather of his belt. His gaze was fixed on the opening car door. He'd never imagined needing to send for a wife, but life, as it often did, had dealt him a hand he hadn't anticipated. Since burying his brother the previous winter and taking in his orphaned nephew, he was desperate for a reliable partner, a strong pair of hands. The advertisement had been a shot in the dark, a last-ditch effort he barely expected to yield results. But then Josephine had written back, her words resonating with a quiet strength that intrigued him. The door creaked open, and a stream of travelers began to disembark. Families clutching bundles, weary-eyed drifters, and a traveling preacher with a worn leather Bible. Then she appeared. She was fragile, almost translucent, her clothes threadbare, resembling a patched-up curtain and a coat far too large for her slender frame. Her boots were split and worn through at the toes. A simple canvas satchel was clutched in her hand, as if it contained the last vestiges of her hope. Her hair, the color of sun-dried wheat, was pulled back in a haphazard bun, revealing a face that, despite its fatigue, pallor, and streaks of dust, possessed an undeniable beauty. Not the conventional kind, but a beauty born of resilience, a testament to surviving trials and tribulations. Archer touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture. "Miss Josephine?" She blinked, her eyes filled with a hesitant uncertainty. "Yes?" "You must be Mr. Rowan. Please call me Archer," he said, extending a hand roughened by years of hard work. She paused for a moment, then placed her hand in his. It was cold, small, but possessed a surprising firmness. "I was expecting you tomorrow," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "They had some trouble east of Helena," she explained, her voice soft but clear. "I thought it best to arrive late than wait another week." He nodded in understanding, then glanced at her meager belongings. "Is this all you brought?" Her eyes fell to her worn satchel. "It is." He refrained from pressing further. Her letter had hinted at the stark realities of her past. A family lost to time, nothing left to hold her, just a profound longing for a fresh start in a place where no one knew her story. "Well," he said, gently taking the satchel, "the wagon's this way." She followed him without a word of complaint, no unnecessary chatter or demands. Archer appreciated her quiet self-sufficiency. As they journeyed across the vast prairie, the wind playfully tugging at her loose coat, Josephine remained silent, yet observant. Her eyes swept across the landscape, taking in the endless expanse of sagebrush, the golden hues of the swaying grass, and the majestic snow-capped peaks looming in the distance. Archer stole a glance at her. There was no fear in her eyes, only a profound weariness. Her hands remained clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. They reached the ranch as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. It was a modest homestead nestled against a protective ridge. The barn leaned precariously to one side, but the house stood solid, a beacon of stability. A young boy exploded out of the front door, his hair the same deep brown as Archer's, his cheeks dusted with freckles. He raced towards the wagon with unrestrained enthusiasm. "Uncle Archer, she's here." "Right here, son," Archer replied, stepping down and offering Josephine a steadying hand. The boy's eyes widened with excitement. "I'm Y. I'm 5 years old. I lost my mama and my daddy, but Uncle Archer takes good care of me now." Josephine knelt to be at eye level with him. "Hello, Y. I am Josephine. It's a pleasure to meet you." He reached out and gently touched her coat. "You seem cold." A faint smile touched her lips. "I am." Archer cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Why don't you go inside and add some wood to the fire for Miss Josephine?" The boy darted off, and Archer helped Josephine down from the wagon, holding on to her satchel. "I prepared the back bedroom for you. I thought you might want some time to settle in." Josephine didn't object. She walked beside him into the house, the warmth embracing them as they stepped inside. The air was filled with the comforting aroma of wood smoke and simmering stew, punctuated by the sound of Y excitedly dragging a stool towards the stove. Later that night, Archer sat on the porch, the vast expanse of the starlit sky stretching before him. Josephine emerged quietly and joined him. She had washed the travel grime from her face, and her damp hair, now freed from its tight bun, curled softly around her face. She wore a simple dress Archer had left on the bed, a hand-me-down from his late sister-in-law, but it suited her better than the ill-fitting coat ever could. "I hope I am not being too forward," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I would much rather work for my keep than simply be taken in out of pity." Archer turned to face her. "I didn't bring you here out of pity, Josephine." She lowered her gaze, then looked out at the land stretching beyond the porch rail. "I wasn't always like this, Archer. I had a home once, a loving husband. He succumbed to consumption 3 years ago. His family turned me out. I tried to find work, but everything felt wrong after that. Your letter, it was the first act of genuine kindness I had encountered in a long, long time." He remained silent, allowing her to share her story at her own pace. "I know I might not appear like much right now," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "But I am capable of hard work. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not afraid of difficult tasks." "I never cared about appearances, Josephine," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I simply needed someone strong, someone resilient." She turned her face towards him, her eyes searching his. "Then you found the right woman." They remained like that for a long while, not touching, not speaking, simply breathing in the tranquility of the night. The following morning, Josephine was up before dawn, a testament to her inherent work ethic. She was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, her hair neatly braided, tending to the fire with practiced ease. Y stumbled in, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. She greeted him with a gentle smile. "Hungry?" He nodded eagerly, and she handed him a warm biscuit fresh from the stove. Archer stood in the doorway, observing the scene. She moved around the kitchen as if she had always belonged there, not ostentatious, not grand, but simply competent and sure of herself. She didn't wait for instructions. She simply assessed what needed to be done and did it. By the end of the week, the house was cleaner and more organized than it had been in months. Y followed her everywhere, captivated by her quiet competence, and Archer found himself unable to stop watching her. The graceful way her hands moved, the genuine, albeit quiet, laughter that escaped her lips when Y said something nonsensical, the way she looked at Archer, not as a man who had simply answered her advertisement, but as a man she genuinely trusted. One evening after supper, he found her folding laundry on the porch, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. He sat beside her, the silence comfortable. "I'm not a man of many words," he began, his voice a little rough around the edges. She glanced at him, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "I noticed. But I see you, Archer. I see what you are made of, and I desire you to remain here, not just as someone helping around the house, but as my wife, my partner." Her hands froze mid-fold. "I know it seems fast," he added, his eyes searching hers. "But I'm not one for pretending when I recognize something that feels right." Josephine looked at him, really looked at him, her eyes conveying both vulnerability and strength. "I came here with absolutely nothing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But if you truly mean those words, if you want me as I am, free from the shadows of my past, then yes, Archer, I will become your wife." Archer reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. She reciprocated, and for the first time since she had stepped off that train, Josephine smiled freely, a radiant expression that lit up her entire face. The wedding was a simple affair, held in the cozy parlor beneath the sampler Archer's sister-in-law had once hung above the mantel. The circuit preacher from Twin Pines arrived on horseback that morning, dust clinging to his worn cuffs. When he turned to Josephine and asked if she had any vows to offer, she met Archer's gaze and declared, "I vow to cherish what is given to me and to give back what I can with all my heart." She wore a gown Archer's mother had crafted decades earlier and carefully preserved in oilcloth. It fit her surprisingly well, a testament to its timeless design. After the preacher departed and the sun began to set, Y drifted off to sleep on the rug, a toy horse clutched tightly in his small arms. Josephine gently covered him with a quilt, smoothing his hair before rising to her feet. Archer followed her into the adjoining room. "Tomorrow," she began, her voice hesitant, "Y will need to know he is still safe, still secure. I will not change a single thing that doesn't need changing," he assured her, his eyes conveying his unwavering commitment. She nodded, then folded her arms across her chest. "I never anticipated finding love again, Archer. I certainly never expected to need someone this deeply." Her voice was laced with both wonder and gratitude. She studied his calloused hands, so strong and capable. "You don't press your luck. I appreciate that." They didn't touch, but they stood close, their presence a silent promise of enduring support. The stove clicked softly as the fire settled within. The following weeks unfolded with the natural rhythm of spring transitioning into summer. Archer left before dawn each day, tending to the cattle grazing on the slopes, repairing fences bordering the south pasture, and ensuring the water lines from the ridge were functioning properly. Josephine took charge of the house and the garden, but her true calling lay in mending and nurturing, not just of fabrics, but of the tender, vulnerable places within Y's heart. One afternoon, while Archer repaired a broken gate latch, he observed Josephine and Y halfway up the ridge, gathering wild onions in a small tin bucket. Y pointed out something of interest, and she knelt beside him, carefully brushing away the dirt from a root. Her braid was tied back with a strip of muslin, the wind playfully tugging at her hair. Archer leaned against the fence rail, watching them as if witnessing a scene he had long given up hope of ever experiencing again. That evening, she presented him with a plate of venison, seasoned with the wild onions they had gathered. He savored each bite. "You cook with the precision of a master craftsman," he remarked, his tone laced with admiration. She leaned against the table, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I used to be a seamstress, remember? It's a habit, I suppose." "You never mentioned that," he said, his expression thoughtful. "No one asked," she replied simply. He placed his fork down. "If you ever want to sew again, there's a shop in Red Rock. They could definitely use a pair of steady hands." She poured water into a tin cup. "I want to build something here first, Archer, then perhaps later." That week, she retrieved an old rocking chair from the shed and meticulously sanded the splinters from its surface on the porch. Y sat in it that evening, rocking gently as she regaled him with tales of how to distinguish between a red-tailed hawk and a prairie falcon. Archer listened from the doorway, his arms crossed, the fading light casting long shadows across the floor. One morning, Archer returned from town carrying a sack of flour and a carefully wrapped parcel. He placed both on the kitchen table. Josephine raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "What's this?" "Something I saw at the mercantile made me think of you." She carefully unwrapped the cloth. It was a bolt of soft blue gingham. She ran her fingers over the fabric, then looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You really didn't have to." She held the fabric up to the light, admiring its delicate weave. "I could make Y a new shirt." "I was thinking you might want to make something for yourself," he said, his voice gentle. She held the cloth for a moment longer, then carefully folded it. "I will." That night, a low, steady wind began to blow, followed by a soothing rain. It drummed against the roof, a comforting rhythm. Y curled up on the cot in the other room, and Josephine sat at the table by the lamplight, sketching measurements on a scrap of paper. Archer poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her. "You always need to keep your hands busy, don't you?" he observed. "They stop shaking when they are occupied," she confessed, her voice quiet. He sat down across from her. "Are you still afraid, Josephine?" "Not of this," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Just of losing it before it truly feels real." He reached out, his touch slow and deliberate, and covered her hand with his. "It is real, Josephine." She didn't pull away. Her eyes locked with his, steady and clear. "I believe you," she said. The lamp burned low, but neither of them made a move to extinguish it. Outside, the rain softened, and the wind subsided into a gentle hush. In the stillness, something profound took root between them, not fragile or fleeting, but the kind of deep connection that grows when 2 souls cease running and resolve to stay. By early July, the cottonwoods lining the creek had provided welcome shade, and heat shimmered off the prairie. The vegetable garden behind the house was flourishing, peas climbing high, squash vines sprawling low beneath broad leaves, and onions swelling beneath the soil. Josephine stood barefoot in the garden that morning, her skirt tied at the hem, a trowel in her hand, her hands no longer trembling. Inside, Archer mended a saddle strap by the open window, the scent of sun-warmed earth drifting in, while Y sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, whittling a stick into what he hoped would become a fishing pole. "Uncle Archer?" the boy asked. Without looking up, Archer replied, "Yes, son? How come Miss Josephine never talks about where she came from?" Archer tightened the leather loop thoughtfully. "Some places are best left behind, Y. Folks carry what they need forward." Y frowned, clearly still pondering the question. "But doesn't she miss it?" "She's here now, son," Archer replied, his voice firm. Josephine stepped inside just then, her cheeks flushed from the heat. "I heard my name. What's going on?" Y looked up at her. "I was just wondering if you had a favorite fish." She poured a dipper of water from the barrel and drank. "Trout, pan-fried in butter with wild garlic." The boy grinned. "That's what I'll catch then." She leaned against the counter, brushing dust from her knee. "You'll need patience, Y. Fish don't care how much you want them." Later that afternoon, Josephine saddled the mule and rode into Red Rock with Archer. It was a supply run, but it was also something more significant. The town had always felt like a place where she didn't quite belong, not because anyone had explicitly stated it, but because she had arrived without anything to offer. Now, things felt different. With Archer by her side and her name spoken with kindness by the grocer, the blacksmith, and the widow who sold soap from her porch. At the dry goods store, she studied a bolt of calico with a faded rose print. Archer ran his hand along the shelf beside her. "Thinking about sewing something?" She kept her eyes fixed on the fabric. "Curtains." He waited patiently. "For the front room," she explained, her voice barely audible. "Y wakes up too early with the sunlight in his eyes. I was thinking I could sew something that softens the light." He nodded. "Get what you need." Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling dust along the boardwalk. A man leaned against a post near the livery, his hat pulled low over his eyes. His gaze followed Josephine as she walked by. Archer's hand rested on the small of her back, not in a possessive manner, but as a subtle sign of support. The man didn't speak, but Josephine glanced back once before they turned the corner, a flicker of unease in her eyes. In the wagon, she sat, angled toward him. "Was that someone you knew?" Archer asked, his voice even. "No," she replied, and he didn't press her further. Back at the ranch, she spread the calico across the table, carefully cutting it into even lengths, while he sat nearby, sorting buttons by size. "I can help," he offered. She handed him a needle. "Thread this for me." Archer stood in the doorway, a sense of profound contentment washing over him. The scene was so ordinary, yet it struck him deeply. This remarkable woman who had arrived with nothing, now preparing to make curtains for the boy who called her his own. That evening, after Y had fallen asleep beneath his new curtain, its meticulous little seams catching the soft glow of the moon, Josephine stepped out onto the porch. Archer was already there, sharpening a small blade by the light of a lantern. She sat beside him, her arms folded across her lap. "I think I'm ready to build something with permanence, Archer," she said, her voice filled with determination. He looked over at her, setting the wet stone aside. "You already have, Josephine. I mean something that marks our time here, something that endures," she explained. "A quilt, perhaps, with one block representing each season we experience together." He nodded slowly. "That would be a fine thing." She turned towards him, her eyes searching his. "You've given me space, Archer. You've allowed me to find my own footing. That means more to me than you can possibly know." "I figured you'd step into your own when you were ready," he replied, his voice low and sincere. "I think I am." The crickets were chirping loudly, and the night sky stretched wide above them, a velvet canvas scattered with stars. She reached for his hand, her touch hesitant at first, then firm. He didn't flinch, he simply laced his fingers through hers. "I want to put down roots here, Archer," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You already have," he said again, but softer this time, his words a caress. She leaned into his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against the top of her head. They didn't speak again for a long while. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already settling into place, quiet, certain, and as real as the land beneath their feet. By late August, the days were heavy with heat, and the wind carried the scent of pine pitch and dry grass. Grasshoppers clicked through the garden, and the hens scratched bare patches beneath the cottonwoods. Josephine moved through her days with quiet strength, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hair often unbound, She had begun stitching her quilt in the evenings, using scraps of fabric from old shirts and worn pillowcases, each square meticulously pressed flat. Archer rode out earlier now, checking the cattle that had sought higher ground as the heat intensified. He sometimes took Y along, teaching him how to read the sky and follow a trail. On other days, Y stayed behind, assisting Josephine with lifting the last of the potatoes or learning how to split kindling. One evening, Josephine stood at the fence line near the pasture, watching the fading light paint the distant hills. The horses had come in early, dust clinging to their flanks, their breath slow and easy. Archer joined her, wiping his hands with a rag. "Have you ever thought about building a windbreak along the ridge?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I have," he replied, "but I never had the extra hands to make it worthwhile." She turned to him. "I can help. If we stack stone instead of building a fence, it will last longer." "You know how to do that?" he asked, surprised. "My father was a stonemason. I watched him work more than I spoke," she said with a smile. He nodded thoughtfully. "You always surprise me, Josephine." "I've had to be more than one thing," she said. "I suspect most folks do." He leaned against the post beside her, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his face as the last rays of the sun caught the back of his neck. "You keep adding pieces to this place, Josephine, I've noticed." She glanced down at her hands, now rough and calloused. "Sometimes I worry I don't know when to stop." "I hope you don't," he replied softly. That night, after the lanterns were out and Y was asleep, Josephine sat cross-legged on the floor beside the hearth, carefully sorting the fabric squares she had completed. Archer came in from the porch, his boots off, the hem of his shirt untucked. "Do you ever think about what it will look like when it's all stitched together?" he asked, his voice low. "I prefer to let it unfold organically," she replied. "Some things don't need a plan." He crouched beside her, picked up a square of faded green checks. "This fabric came from the shirt I wore when we buried my brother." She nodded. "I set it aside. I thought it should be included." He placed the square back down carefully. "You remember everything, Josephine." "I remember what matters, Archer." The next morning, Josephine walked to the neighboring homestead, a mile to the east, where a woman named Mabel kept bees and traded honey for eggs. Y walked beside her carrying a small basket, his hat too large for his head. Mabel met them at the gate, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be the new wife," she said, squinting against the sunlight. "I am Josephine." Mabel sized her up, then nodded approvingly. "You've worked wonders with that man, you know. He used to carry so much silence within him. Now he seems like he's still carrying it, but it doesn't wound him the same way." Josephine didn't respond. She simply offered the basket of eggs. Inside, Mabel poured them both water and allowed Y to sample honey straight from the comb. Josephine inquired about the hives, listening intently as Mabel described how the bees remembered where they had been and circled back to what nourished them. As they left, Y skipped a stone across the path. Mabel turned to Josephine, her expression thoughtful. "You look like you've lived through a fire, child." "Perhaps I have," Josephine replied, her voice soft. Back at the ranch, Archer had returned from the ridge early. A storm was gathering, the kind that rolled in from the west, sudden and intense. He secured the tools and herded the animals to shelter. Josephine helped him tie down the shutters, her braid whipping in the wind, and she didn't flinch when the first thunderclap echoed. Inside, Y sat beneath the window, watching the roiling clouds. Josephine lit the lamp and sat beside him. "It will pass," she assured him. "I know," he replied, his voice small. Archer watched them from the doorway, the flickering light illuminating his face. When Josephine rose to her feet, he gently caught her hand. "You are the one who stabilizes things here, Josephine," he said. She turned to him, her eyes filled with love. "So do you, Archer." He reached into his pocket and produced a small, cloth-wrapped object. She opened it carefully. Inside was a silver thimble, its edge engraved with tiny wildflowers. "I found it in town," he said. "I thought you could put it to use." Her breath caught in her throat. She closed her fingers around the thimble. "I will," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The storm shook the house, but inside everything felt secure. The walls, the warmth, the three of them gathered close. Josephine moved through the house with quiet purpose, placing a bowl beneath the leak in the corner and tucking the quilt tighter around Y's shoulders. Later, in the darkness, she lay beside Archer, their hands interlaced between them. "Do you think it's always this quiet after a storm?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Only when you've built something worth protecting," he replied. She didn't answer, but her breathing slowed and sleep came easily. September brought cooler mornings and a golden hue to the hills. The air smelled of drying hay and pine, and the sky had taken on a crisp blue. Josephine kept a kettle of water warm on the stove, and she had sewn a new lining into Y's coat. That morning, Archer found her kneeling near the chicken coop, coaxing a hen back into the yard. She stood as he approached, brushing straw from her skirt. "The fence needs patching again," she said. "I'll get to it after breakfast. You sleep all right?" he asked. "I dreamed I was back in Missouri," she said, "but the house was gone and the door opened into this place instead." He looked at her. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No," she said. "I just wanted to say the dream didn't scare me. That's new." He nodded and took her hand. Inside, Y sat at the table, copying letters onto a slate board. Josephine poured him milk. "I can spell my name now," he said. "Next we'll work on your uncles," she said. "Too many letters," Y muttered. "Then we'll start with A," she said. By afternoon, the sky was overcast. Archer rode out to check the water troughs, and Josephine finished the quilt. It wasn't perfect, but it held weight. Every stitch had purpose. She heard the wagon wheels just before sunset. Archer was back, Y running ahead, his hands stained with juice. Josephine met them. "Found a patch up by the ridge," Archer said. "They were fine, I saved you some," Y added, holding out a tin. Josephine took it, smiling. "I'll bake them into something tomorrow." That night, Josephine sat on the porch, a shawl around her shoulders. Archer joined her, handing her tea. "You ever think about building more?" she asked. "A smokehouse, maybe? A dairy shed?" "I have, but I didn't want to do it alone." "You won't have to." He hesitated, then said, "You've put more into this place than I thought possible." "You're not idle either," she said. "You are my home and everything I've ever wanted." He paused. "I know, but you've done more than work. You've made it home again." She looked at him then, her eyes steady. "So have you." The next days passed with the quiet rhythm they'd built together. Josephine taught Y to hem his trousers, and Archer finished the stone windbreak with her. One evening, Archer set a wooden box on the table. Josephine unlatched it and found lace. "I thought maybe you could trim the quilt with it," he said. She traced it with her thumb. "You remembered I said I used to sew for brides?" I remembered. When the first snow came, Josephine, Archer, and Y stood at the window, watching it drift. Later that evening, the three of them sat around the fire, Y curled between them. Josephine leaned her head against Archer's shoulder. "I used to think peace was for other people," she said. "You've earned it. So have you." They sat like that, the quiet between them full. Years later, the quilt lay folded at the foot of their bed. The dairy shed stood sturdy. Y grew tall. On Sundays, Josephine baked bread while Archer read aloud, and in the evenings they sat on the porch, wrapped under a shawl. Nothing grand had changed. Fences still needed mending, winters still bit, but love had settled deep, enduring. And so we leave Archer and Josephine, not at the end of their story, but nestled deeply within it. Their journey is a testament to the enduring power of resilience, the unexpected bloom of love in the harshest landscapes, and the way a shared commitment to building a life together can heal even the deepest wounds. It reminds us that home isn't just a place, but a feeling, woven from kindness, strength, and a willingness to cherish what we're given. What part of their story resonated most with you? Did anything surprise you, or perhaps remind you of your own experiences with love and healing? I'd love to hear your thoughts and interpretations in the comments below. Feel free to share your own stories, ask questions, or simply join the conversation. And if you enjoyed this journey with Archer and Josephine, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future stories filled with heart, hope, and the enduring beauty of the human spirit. We'll see you next time.